The laughter came first sharp, mocking bursts that tore through the dusty morning air like shrapnel. Boots pounded against the earth in steady rhythm. Dozens of soldiers running in formation beneath a sky already burning with the weight of the Sunday. And then, in the middle of the pack, one figure slowed. She didn't stumble. She didn't collapse. She simply stopped running. The jeers erupted instantly. "Too much for you, huh?" One voice called. Another, more cruel, cut across the field. "Should have stayed home." The others chuckled, shaking their heads as they surged past her. To them, she was the weak link, the proof of every whispered doubt, every unspoken prejudice. A woman in their ranks, and now, in their eyes, failing. But she didn't flinch. She stood, shoulders heaving, chest rising, and falling like a furnace. Dust swirled around her boots, catching the morning light as if the earth itself held its breath. She neither defended herself nor explained. She let the mockery hang in the air like smoke. What none of them knew was that her silence was not surrender. It was calculation. Her name was Elena Torres, though names hardly mattered in the unforgiving world of drills and endurance tests. What mattered was grit, the kind forged not in the gym but in fire, loss, and years of carrying burdens no one else could see. Long before she wore the uniform, she carried her father paralyzed from an accident at work up and down narrow apartment stairs each day, so he could feel the sun on his face. Long before boot camp, she carried groceries on one shoulder and her little brother on the other, through neighborhoods where survival depended on speed and silence. And long before this morning's test, she carried grief. A fiancé lost to war, a ring still sitting in a box she never opened, memories folded away like letters too dangerous to read. The weight of a 200-pound sergeant, though brutal, was nothing compared to the years she'd already carried. The sergeant leading the drill barked at her from the front. His voice was gravel dragged over steel. "Torres, if you stop here, you don't just fail. You disgrace this unit." The soldiers around her snickered, some shaking their heads, others openly smirking. The air filled with judgment, thick as the dust rising beneath their boots. Still, she said nothing. She knew what they expected: excuses, tears, collapse. She gave them none of it. Instead, her eyes lingered on the sergeant himself, a towering man with the build of a tree trunk and the weight of an iron statue. He watched her with a sneer, daring her to prove him right. And then the command came, the one all of them dreaded. "Casualty, carry. 3 miles." A stunned silence fell over the group, broken only by one soldier muttering, "Well, she's done for." The sergeant smirked, perhaps enjoying the cruelty of it. "Pair up," he barked. But before anyone could move, Torres stepped forward. Her voice was steady, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the doubt. "I'll carry you." The sneer vanished. The laughter stopped. The sergeant weighed 200 pounds of muscle and authority. When he stepped toward her, some soldiers shook their heads, others whispered bets under their breath. But Torres bent her knees, slid her shoulder beneath his arm, and with a controlled breath, lifted him clean off the ground. For a heartbeat, the entire field froze. The sergeant's boots dangled in the air. Torres steadied her footing, gripping his wrist and thigh with precision. Her body wavered for only an instant before finding its balance. Then, without a word, she began to walk. Every step was war. Her boots sank into the dust, the weight pressing down on her spine like a collapsing building. The sun seared her skin, sweat blinding her eyes, salt stinging as it trickled into the corners of her mouth. Each breath burned in her chest. Every muscle screamed for release. Behind her, the soldiers who once laughed fell into stunned silence. Some whispered in disbelief. Others simply watched, the smug certainty draining from their faces. A mile passed. The sergeant shifted slightly on her shoulders, perhaps testing her strength, perhaps waiting for her to crumble. But Torres did not falter. The rhythm of her footsteps was slow but unyielding. Dust rose with every step, clinging to her uniform, staining her skin. 2 miles. By now, the men behind her no longer whispered. They marched in reverent quiet, their earlier laughter a ghost that seemed almost obscene in the face of what they now witnessed. And through it all, Torres said nothing. Her silence was louder than any defiance. Inside her mind, storms raged. Memories surged like waves. Her father's body slung across her shoulder, his labored breaths in her ear. Her brother's small arms wrapped around her neck, his giggles against the backdrop of sirens. Her fiancé's last letter, words smudged from the tears she swore she wouldn't shed. Every ghost added weight, and yet, each ghost also gave her strength. She whispered to herself, but only in thought, pain is not the enemy. Quitting is. At the edge of the 3rd mile, her legs threatened mutiny. Her vision blurred, the ground beneath her feet twisting like liquid. For the first time, her body wavered dangerously. The sergeant tensed, as if ready to drop to the ground, to confirm the failure he had expected. But then it happened. The soldiers behind her, those who once mocked, began to chant. Not cruelly this time. Not with mockery. With respect. Torres. 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 The sound grew, a rhythm that carried her forward when her legs could not. She wasn't walking alone anymore. Every step was fueled by voices that had shifted from scorn to awe. And then, with one final surge, she crossed the invisible finish line, the full 3 miles complete. She dropped to one knee, easing the sergeant down with surprising gentleness, as though even in triumph she carried no malice. Her body trembled, her muscles screamed, but her head remained high. The sergeant stood slowly, his face unreadable. Dust streaked his uniform, his jaw clenched tight. For a long, unbearable moment, no one spoke. Then he broke the silence. "Strength," he said quietly, his voice stripped of arrogance, "isn't measured in muscle, it's measured in what you refuse to surrender." The soldiers behind her straightened, some averting their eyes in shame, others staring at her with something close to reverence. Word of the march spread quickly, whispered from barrack to barrack until it became legend. Soldiers who never respected her before now stood when she entered a room. Training runs were quieter, more focused, as if her silent endurance had stitched a new kind of discipline into their bones. Even the sergeant, once her harshest skeptic, would glance at her during drills with something resembling pride. He never apologized, not with words, but respect, in that world, was rarely spoken. It was seen, and it was seen in the way no one laughed again when she slowed her pace, or when she paused to gather strength. They understood now. She was not stopping. She was preparing. Elena Torres walked back to her quarters that evening, body aching, throat raw from dust and silence. But her spirit felt lighter than it had in years. She carried nothing on her shoulders now, no father, no brother, no lost love. For once, she carried only herself. The sunset bled across the horizon in fierce shades of red and gold. She stopped for a moment, watching it burn. And though no one heard, she allowed herself a whisper. This weight, it was never too much. Emotional reflection for the audience. In the end, the soldiers learned something far more valuable than endurance or strength. They learned that true power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it moves in silence. Sometimes, it carries what no one else dares to lift. And sometimes, it changes the way entire rooms stand when one person enters. So the question is, what weight are you carrying, silently, that no one else can see? Because sometimes, the heaviest burdens lead to the strongest victories.